Good morning, CNN Facebook followers. Polo Sandoval here saying hello from sunny Miami Beach, where folks are slowly beginning to trickle out. And folks are not only preparing for the weekend, but also talking about what happened early this morning. We are providing this Facebook Live to you to be able to try to fill in some of the gaps and fill you and bring you up to speed on some of the aerial spraying that we've seen here in Miami Beach as local officials here try to go after, or at least try to decrease the risk of that Zika virus that has been really heavily concerning for many people here in Florida. So do send in your questions as we try to answer that. Some of our partners and of course some of our colleagues will be sending over some of your questions here, and I'll be following what you have to say on Facebook and Facebook Live here as we try to again give you a better perspective of what happened this morning. As we wait for some of those questions, let me tell you a little bit about what happened early this morning. Some local officials here relying on a contractor that they often turn to for that aerial spraying. And so what we saw early this morning at about 5 a.m. or so, where it was a plane that essentially flew just off the coast of Florida in a way to try to allow some of these chemicals to make their way on land to try to go after the adult mosquitoes that are responsible for the carrying of the Zika virus. Now, one of the reasons why we are here is because, again, we have seen this before in a community, in a neighborhood just north of here, but this is the first round of spraying since the Zika concern began to emerge in South Beach. So again, bring in some of those questions. We are hoping to answer some of them as we continue to focus on what is this effort to try to decrease the risk of Zika. So how concerned are people in the area? That's a really good question. I can tell you that there are folks taking tours. There are folks jogging on the beach right now, so you wouldn't necessarily know it. Are people talking about it? Absolutely. But is it keeping them away from this region? I would say not so much, in spite of some of those warnings that we have heard from officials, particularly for pregnant women. We know that that is really where much of the risk is focused on, based on what medical professionals have to say. But again, we've been here a few hours. We've seen people out for a morning stroll, out for breakfast, out on the beach. Are they worried? I would say they may be slightly concerned, but is it keeping them away from the beach? I would say not necessarily right now. A lot of people are concerned about how this will affect bees. Have you heard of this? Yeah, we actually have heard about that in other states. As far as here, we haven't necessarily seen some of those effects quite yet, and officials don't necessarily expect that because the chemical that's used here, Naled, does carry relatively minimal risks, even though it was banned by the EU. Of course, we'll talk about that a little more in depth in just a little while. But again, no, we have not necessarily seen a whole lot of impact on wildlife or on some of the insects in this area. Of course, mosquitoes, though, that's what officials want to go after. Have other places used these sprays? Absolutely. In fact, that Wynwood neighborhood that saw the first locally transmitted case a few miles north of here did begin aerial spraying a few weeks back. Not just aerial spraying, but also spraying on the ground. That's essentially supposed to go after the mosquito more at its larva stage, but it's the aerial spraying that likes to target some of the adult mosquitoes that are flying in the air that could potentially be transmitting that, since we now have at least 56 locally transmitted cases here in the United States. What does that mean? That essentially means that those 56 people would have been bitten by a mosquito, or bit by a mosquito, that would have been carrying that Zika virus. Compare that with about 600 travel-related cases. That means people would have been infected in another area that is not necessarily Florida. And those are the numbers that have officials so worried this morning, and why we're seeing that aerial spraying. Is Florida doing anything else to prevent Zika? Information is power. Knowledge is power here. So what they are doing, they are launching this campaign to inform people about the risks of Zika, particularly for pregnant women. But at the same time, they are also hoping to calm any concerns for people who may be visiting this area. And that's one of the reasons why we have seen this aerial spraying here in Miami Beach, is in order to really allow people to have all the information they need, before they make their way here. So another question that's coming in: have you noticed a lot of mosquitoes since we've been here? No. The wind, obviously a heavy factor here. There have to be some pretty tough mosquitoes to be flying in some of this coastal breeze that we continue to see on Florida's coast, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not there. And that is why it's more concerning for some of the communities further inland, some of the communities that may not necessarily be on the coast. That's why that is one of the areas of focus here. Let's see here. So let me tell you a little bit about Naled, which is one of the chemicals that's obviously highly controversial here. This is a chemical that is really one of the main ingredients and what's being used by authorities here in these aerial sprays. And what's happening is it's essentially being sprayed just off the coast. The idea there is that some of the coastal winds would basically carry some of that pesticide closer to where it should be used. So you're not necessarily spraying it over the highly populated areas, but that is where part of the questions come into play here. Is that effective? Shouldn't it be perhaps sprayed over the communities that are deeply affected by this? Well, the answer for officials is, well, not necessarily, because the plan is, again, to spray it off the coast and then have it make its way closer to the land. Is this the only time they are spraying it? No. This is the first of what we expect will be several rounds here in Miami Beach. The next one is expected for Sunday morning. That is when officials will be back in the air again, spraying this pesticide in this particular community. But again, the reason why they're spraying it during the day is that they're not necessarily doing it while there is a tremendous amount of people out and about. That also happens to be when this mosquito that tends to transmit this Zika virus is most active, just after sunset and also before dawn. So it's not just because of the mosquito's activity, but also when you tend to see less people out on the road and out on the sidewalks that they want to do some of the spraying. So let's touch on the bees, this issue about the bees again. Again, we have read reports that there have been bees that have been affected. Some of them even, that this pesticide has even killed some of those bees in other states. I'd have to check right now and see if we've actually seen that in Florida. I have not read any specific reports. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's not the case. But again, there are those concerns about wildlife, about other insects. Officials want to go after the mosquito, not necessarily after bees. But I should mention that this is something that, or at least this chemical, has been, again, banned by the EU, but so have other substances that are widely used in the United States. I was talking it over with one of my colleagues, telling me that yellow number 5, for example, the stuff that makes that mac and cheese bright yellow, that also has been banned by the EU, yet is widely used in the United States. The stuff that makes Kool-Aid red, well, that would be red dye number 5. So another substance has been banned by the EU. So it just ties into that debate about whether or not this substance should be used in the United States. The CDC, the EPA, those are two government organizations that have said that it is safe to use, and that is one of the reasons why local officials here at the county level with Miami-Dade are choosing to move forward with this aerial spraying. Are other areas of Florida being sprayed? So the Wynwood community, which is just a few miles north of here, that was essentially considered ground zero here, because that is the place where the first locally contracted illness, Zika illness, was confirmed a few months back. This was somebody that basically came into contact, or a mosquito came into contact with an individual and then infected that individual with the Zika virus. That number was at about 6 a few weeks back. That's now at about 56 and getting closer to 60. And again, those are locally transmitted cases. Compare that to about 600 travel-related cases. That means people that have traveled to South America, perhaps, to Puerto Rico, perhaps, where this is a bigger issue, and then traveled to the United States, tested positive for Zika. So those are now at about 600 cases. Is tourism down in Miami because of this? I would say, at first glance, you still see people on those tour buses. You still see people out at these restaurants, sitting out on patios, sitting out on the sidewalks, having their breakfast. So I think we would have to take a closer look at the numbers to see if it's actually had a deep effect on some of the financial aspects of the story here. But I would say at first glance, I have not seen a tremendous effect. Even though I live in Atlanta, I'm not here very often, but I did speak to people who actually live here. They say this is fairly typical. The number of people that we've seen for Friday morning, expect the crowds to grow larger. But again, the main recommendation for officials is don't necessarily stay away from here. Just, take some of those precautions, use some of that DEET repellent, and of course, for those mothers who are pregnant or planning to be pregnant, simply try to avoid the area or stay indoors if possible, because yes, that is a concern. That is really the focus for health officials here as they continue to fight the Zika virus. Let's see, any other questions that you guys have for me, please keep them coming. But again, the reason why we are here this morning is because it was the first round of aerial spraying for Miami Beach since this Zika concern began to surface. Yes, we have seen aerial spraying in other parts of the state here, particularly just north of here in the Wynwood neighborhood, but this is the first time that we see it since the Zika concern began to surface. I should point out, though, that aerial spraying is not new to the region. We do know that some of these pesticides, particularly the ones containing this NALED chemical, have been used for decades now. They've been okayed by the EPA, they've been okayed by the CDC to use, and that's why officials have been taken to the skies to try to tackle that problem from the air, but also from the ground. We should keep in mind that officials have been on the ground as well with ground spraying, as well as some of those pellets that are often used in some of the stagnant bodies of water to try to keep some of these mosquitoes from growing. So we want to thank you for chiming in. We want to thank you for having an interest in this story, because yes, it is something that we should keep an eye on. Is it at the level that perhaps other countries or the regions have, perhaps in South America or or in Puerto Rico? No, it's not. But is it a reason to stay vigilant, and is it a reason to really take extra steps to protect yourselves? Absolutely. But officials say it's not necessarily a reason to stay away from this particular area. Stay online, stay with us at CNN.com, both online and on air, as we continue to follow the developments here as the first round of spraying in Miami Beach since the Zika concern began to surface. Folks, thank you so much for logging on to CNN.com and to CNN's Facebook page. Have a great day.